Hey, today I have back Shannon Waller from Strategic Coach. You will recall her from episodes 13 and 21, where we discussed the effects on the team with undiagnosed ADHD and never being the victim. Just as a reminder, Shannon Waller is a passionate expert on entrepreneurial teams with Strategic Coach. She is a coach, author, and a podcast host of the Team Success podcast, which I'll have a link in the show notes, and someone I truly enjoy talking about self-discovery and self-awareness. Thanks again, Shannon, for coming.
It is a pleasure, Andre. I love our conversations and where we go, often unexpected paths.
This is great because we always learn something when we're together. And I shared with you a mindfulness, wise mind construct from DBT therapy I'm currently in the process of completing. And that's the DBT is dialectical behavioral therapy. Just to give you a little fact-finding facts for the listeners. Basically, it's cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, that has mindfulness adding to it, which also teaches skills on how to cope with your challenges with mindfulness, distress tolerance, emotional regulation, and interpersonal effectiveness. So you're taught tools, not only catch your thought, check it, and let it go. This was created by Marsha M. Linehan, and it was to treat her old self, is what she actually did. There was no therapy for her that worked, so she created one that really helped people that had suicidal thoughts and self-harm thoughts. And just to give a little clarity here, when we're talking about mindfulness in the DBT sense, it's about noticing what is. That includes your distractions, your thoughts, your feelings, both pleasant and unpleasant. And the key word here is without judgment. That's what mindfulness is. It's without judgment. You can think this, you can feel that, but don't judge it and be hard on yourself is ultimately. So, and it's all about finding a middle path when you're in wise mind. And that's what we want to talk about. So if you can visualize two circles, okay? Left hand is reasonable mind. That's where you're cool, rational, and task focused. This is where you're ruled by facts, reason, logic, and pragmatics. Values and feelings are not important. In your right hand circle is emotion mind. It's mood dependent and emotion focused. When in emotion mind, you are ruled by your moods, feelings, and urges to do or say things. Facts, reason, and logic are not important. So if you're in one mind versus the other, you can get in a lot of trouble. But if we put those two circles together and we have an overlap, I guess is what they call a fancy word, the Venn diagram, forget now. But that overlap is what they call the wise mind. This is your wisdom. It's seeing the value of both reason and emotion. And this is where we can find a middle path. And when I shared this with you, Shannon, you went goody, 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 oh, ha, 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 ha. And why did you get that reaction?
Oh, yeah, I really did because I have experience with both DBT and CBT.
Oh,
And
I didn't know that.
I'm a huge fan. And it was actually for my family. So I studied psychology. I was, when I went to school, I was all about people in business, but it was the people psychological side that I was really interested in. My mom is trained as a social worker, and I swear to God, I would never ever take, psychology in university. What did I end up taking? Psychology in university.
I didn't realize your mom was not a therapist or
Yeah.
social worker. That's cool.
Yeah, she was
That makes
trained as a
sense.
social worker. She was also trained as a nurse. She's very much
Oh,
a people
wow.
person, as you
Yeah.
know. But I had a little bit too much exposure to the
Yeah.
downside of some of that. But then of course, what do I end up doing? I'm all about the people in business. I mean, so it's ironic. But I know about lots of different types of therapies, and these are the most practical. No, CBT and DBT, cognitive and dialectical behavior therapy, are the most documented to work. And
Yes.
not just for ADHD, for everybody. But given what you talked about, you know, when we can flip often to the emotion, in which case hijacks all the doing.
Yep.
We're
Yep.
so focused on doing, we completely tune out the emotion side. I think, for as people with ADHD, we can polarize as opposed to bring those together. So
Well,
is therapy
it's one or the other, right? It's all or nothing,
exactly.
right?
And I think, first of all, everyone can benefit from CBT and DBT, to be super
Well,
clear.
a lot of
And
mental health, depression, bipolar, all that. It's not across the board. Yeah.
yeah, and I actually think for neurotypical people, they still run into issues like
Yep.
this stuff too. So it's very useful, but I think it has particular applications for ADHD. It's because it's so practical. It's what you do.
Hmm.
And the thing when I learned about dialectical, because I understood about cognitive behavioral therapy, and I kind of went to the parent version of the course, in case you're wondering. The dialectical had to do with information you were taking in from your senses. So it was your experience, the
Hmm.
mindfulness,
And perception.
not just even all your thoughts. It actually went, because often we have very strong body responses to
Yes.
circumstances,
Yep.
and we don't always understand them. And dialectical was like gave you a pathway in. I was like, oh, this is so
Hmm.
genius. So that's why I was like waving
Okay.
my hands and jumping up and down when you mentioned. I'm like, oh my God, I know something about this and I know it works. And the tools that my family learned are still useful today. And it's one of those, you know,
And very applicable to work, to your company, and how you deal with staff.
yeah.
And just based on what you said there too, Shannon, like ADHD brains, like it's an all or nothing. And a lot of times if it's not diagnosed at an early stage, or you don't have quite clarity, as we get very black and white thinking.
Yes.
And it's either black or it's white, and our brain does not like the middle part. But this is what DBT is actually all about, is making the black and white and dealing with the gray, not dealing, seeing the gray. To me, that was the big
Mm,
thing, is for me to see the gray. And all that has to do is checking your facts. A lot of
okay.
stuff I make up is not true.
Right. Right. I know. And it's so cool. And I know as a kid, I was way more black and white. And sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe I kind of wish I had that back sometimes where I was so definitive and so clear. I was also probably really wrong most of the time.
Yeah.
So now I'm like, okay, Shannon, this new version of you is actually a little more nuanced, has a lot more sophistication. It's a good thing to be able to bridge those two. And I know for me, when I see that people can integrate and, their emotion and their reasonable mind and actually come up with that wise mind, I listen to them, I respect them, I want to be like them. And we all have our moments, but it's very powerful when you see that integration of those two thought capabilities and processes. It's really powerful. And
So
so
what
doing the work to integrate, I think, is brilliant.
yeah, so what I heard from you is you prefer to deal with people who are usually, most times, it can't be perfect, in their wise mind.
Those are the people that I aspire to
Yeah.
be like, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
I mean, I spend time with people in lots of different states, and I think I have some skills about helping people make those bridges. But then the people I want to emulate are the ones who've got it figured out more often than I do.
Right, but at the same time too, and I think it reflects a bit on me, that you will not, you're going to help people go from reasonable to wise, from emotion and whatnot. But I think, like for me, is like those people already have to have that ability to be able to do, because it takes a lot of self-awareness and
Yes.
self-honesty, that, man, you've been wrong, and very wrong, and maybe you're not right, and let's check the facts. Like a lot of this stuff make out, like, it's all this perceived interpretations of stuff.
That's such a great point. And one of my unique ability things is actually to deal with reality. And I think one of my major frustrations growing up was I was people being pretend, people being fake.
Yeah.
And it drives me batty. So I do not deal well with that. That's why I work with entrepreneurs and not corporate, because entrepreneurs are pretty darn real. And I like that. And if they're upset or they're happy or they're calm or they're not, doesn't matter. They're real. And I'm dealing with actual information, not some fake version of it.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I love entrepreneurs so much, is I can relate, because that's how I am. What you see is what you get with this one. And
Really?
it's I know you've noticed. It's really
Well,
fun.
it is true. Yet at the same time, is you do it with a wise mind. You're not
Mhm.
doing it to just be, belligerent or difficult. You're actually trying to bring people from the emotional mind. Well, actually, when we go to those workshops, a lot of times we're in an emotional mind, not thinking straight, and you just kind of bring back, here's the reasonability of it, so we can get back in our wise mind.
Yeah.
So, and the way to do that is, and your way of doing it is being tactful and direct. Some people have different ways, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes
Maybe
you're
it's
like,
because
I got it from
my
you. Stop being so difficult, Andre. Get your stuff together. Oh yeah, okay, you're right.
well, it's probably why my new favorite book is called Radical Candor, which is where you care personally and challenge directly,
Hmm.
right? It's and I call it, it's I say to people, I get away with murder because I'll say to people, "Did you really say that?" But because I do it with love, they're like, "Yeah, I know. What was I thinking?" So
Yeah,
I can get away with calling people on stuff because I do it from my heart. I care about them, but I also see that there's strategies because I want to align people's thinking with what's real. That's one of my 10
right.
best behavioral
And that's
habits.
what I call from my side is factual reality. We only deal with
100%.
factual reality.
Yeah.
So
And but also what for me what's real in terms of, and of course I always laugh because it's actually my version of reality. so
that's
so
true.
hopefully they agree. And because I can see when people are are making up, I can see so clearly, and I think you can too, Andre. We can always see it, by the way, way better in other people than we can in ourselves when we're telling ourselves a story. We can see when someone else is telling themselves a story. It's very challenging sometimes to see when we're telling ourselves a story.
Yeah,
But we
yeah.
can see it in others, and I'm like, is that actually true? No Ego by Cy Wakeman. Her whole thing is, okay, what are the facts? To your point, you would love this. What are the facts? And then what story are you telling yourself about that? And you're like,
Hmm.
oh, I made up blah, 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 blah. And it wasn't true. And then we operate out of that story and we actually do harm sometimes to others and to ourselves when we operate out of that misperception of reality.
Well, you just said like whoever you just referenced, that's one of the big things in DBT is actually checking the facts. What are the pros and cons? And the big one I gotta say is radical acceptance is another one.
Mm.
But I just made a deciphering. I actually no, just I just deciphered it. Before radical acceptance, I radically accepted a lot of things, but they were all wrong. I'm just realizing this now. So the other thing we got to deal too here is radical acceptance of what is. And there's nothing we can deal. Is there nothing we can do about it right now? No, let it go. Just
Right.
accept and just let it go. And for me, that was a tough skill and still is a challenge because I get so passionate, especially with the fake stuff, the people who can't see stuff, the news, just everyone, just use your heads. Like that's not what they're telling. But in the end, I gotta let it go or it ruins my day.
Hmm.
So that where the reasonable, my logical mind just got overtaken by my reasonable mind, and I'm no longer in my wise mind, and I'm not making good decisions. I'm not making good recommendations. And I'm attacking people. I
Yeah.
think I'm helping, but I'm actually attacking them because I don't see it that way. But that's how it's received.
It's really interesting as you're talking, Andre. I'm trying to think. Okay, because I know exactly the states that you're talking about because I experienced them too. I'm like, how can I actually tell? And I realize, and this is something else I've learned about ADHD, is that it's when you're in tune with when you have body awareness, like our bodies are this incredible nervous system that's like it's the most amazing sensor on the
Hmm.
planet, right? And when we can tune into how am I actually feeling, you can kind of tell whether or not you're coming from that grounded, centered, wise mind place, or whether or not you're too far into emotion or ego or too harsh and not connecting to that at all and being too, it's not too factual, but do you know what I mean? It's like where emotions don't matter.
Well, I
You can
become
kind of,
robotic. That's what they say with the reasonable mind. If you got no emotion with the reasonable mind, you're robotic. It's facts only, facts only. And I know
yeah,
for a long time for me, that's all I stayed in.
yeah.
Then I didn't have to deal with my emotions. Then people would misinterpret as more direct, blunt, but I was
Yes.
dealing with the facts.
So when we can check in, and I'm holding my gut as we speak, that's really like, oh, and then if that's calm, it's great. And I know for me, understanding my emotions took a while. And I would be, and I don't know if we talked about this last time, but sometimes I get to the end of my day and I'm like, I don't, there's something off. Like my body would be telling me I have this, feeling in the pit of my
Hmm.
stomach.
Yeah,
And then I have to go back mentally through my day and think, when did that start?
yeah.
Because in the moment I wasn't quick enough to catch where something threw me off, where I got triggered, for example. And I'd have to go back to that. And then I have to think about, okay, I need to make that better. Like I need to come to grips with this. I need to either accept it or I need to have a correction conversation or something
Hmm.
to get myself back to centered. And I think that's kind of how I've figured out my wise mind. And I think this is so critical for entrepreneurs. One of my really dear friends, client, strategic coach client, and he actually talked about it. He came from corporate and then became an entrepreneur, very successful, very, very successful, massive, large company where you would know the name. And he said he consciously separated his heart from his head,
Right.
consciously separated it. So what happened is his head, which is it's got big intellect, he operated out of that. His heart, where like he had to work to integrate those two things, and his
To
body paid
create
the
a wise mind.
to create a wise mind, and his body also paid the price. I'll add, and it took it was a very conscious effort for him to reconnect, kind of like what you talked about,
Hmm.
his heart with his head, which was fascinating to me. But once he did, he was a much happier human being. He was much easier, much better communicator,
Well, the thing
much more
is,
effective.
they call the wise mind wise for a reason, because it's wisdom. It's your wisdom, but you got to have the practicality of the reasonable mind with the feelings of the emotional mind, but it's got to be balanced. And
Yeah,
just to
and
go back to what you're saying about you're checking yourself, how the trigger and all that, like those are a lot of DBT skills. I'm learning a
mhm,
lot lately because I'm paying attention in sessions, because it's a group session a week and then a one-on-one. But what you're doing is observing and naming your emotions, which I
yes,
struggle with. I still have an
right.
emotion will I look at, because what I feel is not necessarily the trigger or the cause. And by bringing it to the actual, anger could also be caused by worry, fear, and angst, right? Stuff like that. And you weren't judging yourself. You were just identifying that emotion, what triggered it, and what we can do, the pros and cons. And at the same time, the big thing about DBT is also validating yourself, being okay with you, non-judgmentally.
Well, actually, I'm so glad you said that because I wanted to circle back to that point. It's accepting what is. Byron Katie talks about loving what is, which and it's
Radical
we are
acceptance.
not. I'm sorry, we are not trained in our world to take in what is and accept reality as reality without judging it. That is not in our
Mhm.
society's way of working. But until you do, you're fighting it, and the amount of energy it takes to fight reality is enormous.
It's
And
fighting to be in line with your reality, I think, is what actually is going on.
right, right. And but even it means just kind of it's not resisting what's out there, it's also not resisting what's in here and not judging it
Yes.
and giving it grace is another way to say that. And being at peace with it. And even if your reality is like, oh, I really hated that and everyone else seems to love it, you're like, yeah, that's not for me.
Yeah.
And being okay with that. It's like, oh, this is not my environment. These are not my people. This is not my strength. This is whatever it is. It's I think acknowledging that and validating yourself, because so often we're like, oh, everyone else loves it and I don't. It must be something wrong with me.
Hmm.
That's the decision that gets made. Like I was kind of an angry kid.
Kind
Ask
of.
my mother, she'll tell you. I would get mad like that.
Yes.
So easily triggered, right? Well, for whatever, I mean, fortunately, I've become a little healthier in my response to things or in the actions I took. But I realized I wasn't, now I'm in a place where I can be myself, way fewer triggers, I'm happier. But there's a lot of places where I do not belong in the world because they do not make me happy and I don't make other people happy when I'm in them either.
Yeah, for me, it's corporates, politics, people are fake. But just to quickly touch on what you're talking about, no matter what, even to this day where you are, you still feel those emotions intensely and immediately. That's just an ADHD thing.
Yep.
But the differentiating thing, for what you've figured out and learned, and I'm really getting good handle on because I've been working on it for quite a few years now, is it's that reaction time and what do we do with it?
Yep.
Having that awareness to stay in a wise mind is also key that I'm really learning about.
Well, it's stimulus response,
Yeah.
right? And this is a human thing. So we have a stimulus, and do we react instantly, or can we create that little tiny bit of space where we have some choice about how we respond?
Hmm.
And this is where
And
the cool
mindfulness.
mindfulness. Well, and there's a
Yeah.
cool little mind trick, and this is actually a coach concept as well. For experienced transformer is we can either have a creative or a reactive response. We can create or we can react. Here's the cool thing: creative and reactive have the same letters,
Hmm.
only rearranged. Right. So if you can rearrange your response, you can have a creative. Responsible means able to respond.
Yeah.
which is kind of cool. Whereas reactive, we're just triggered and we're in our emotional mind and we're kind of like hijacked. And then we have to work like hell to get back to that middle place.
So I want to circle back to this body awareness you were talking about,
Mhm.
because I didn't want to interrupt the thoughts we were going, which was really good. But the body awareness for me, when you said that, I'm actually using it way more as an early warning tool, and I never realized this my
Yes.
whole life. It actually was.
Yes.
So when I start feeling certain tension in my shoulders, it's a certain type of stress or potential bullshit coming, or if it's in my stomach, or if I'm really going to explode, it's actually, I feel a whole body aware tenseness. And now I'm like, wait a minute, we got to stop. I am rigid, I'm tense. So what's going on? And this is all in my head. But before it would just, I would let it go, let it go, let it go, and then kablooey,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
I'm so glad you talked about it because I thought I was like the only one.
no, like I think it's, and honestly, in the group I'm in, I'm hearing a lot of those types of stories, and the more entrepreneurs, ADHD entrepreneurs, it's, we're always bringing it back to some body awareness, or like, oh yeah, like I'm starting to observe it with people. Like I can see their shoulders are kind of go up. It's okay, let's just relax here. What's going on? And we're ignoring our bodies, and it's always a great early warning system. Like they're saying a lot of your diseases, your body was giving you signals years and years prior, but you're ignoring it because we're not looking for it or
Mhm.
not aware. Like for me, it's we just, I was not aware. The way our brain works, and we don't know how it works properly, we're not aware of all this. And with this awareness, we can do so much, and it's possible.
100%. There's a couple of places, people from whom I've learned that we kind of are our nervous systems. It's
Yeah.
kind of my conclusion. We are our nervous systems. So, your brain and then it goes down your brain stem, all the way down to your spinal cord, and then all the nerves that go to your, and then you've got, sensory pads of your fingers and your toes and all in your skin and all of that. But it is the one of the it's the most advanced sensor on earth. And so but we don't use it like that. We don't pay attention to it. And it ties to our brains. Hello. And when we can actually really tune in and go, oh, okay, that matters. And then we start to notice it in other people too. Like I love your observation. Someone's shoulders are getting tense. Let's see if we can have them take a breath. This is why people say to breathe,
Mhm.
right? Because you trigger your is it parasympathetic nervous system, the one that calms you down,
Some
right?
sympathetic system.
One of them. Yeah, your sympathetic, I think, is when you get roused, and then your other one is when you calm
Yeah.
down. But it kind of like tells you that you're safe. And we're still instinctual creatures. And I think tuning into that, it adds a whole other layer of wisdom. But again, when we live in such a head-based society, we kind of do forget that. And I think
Right.
the advantage is people with ADHD are just a little more highly tuned, and so if we can include that in our thinking, we'll be a lot wiser, which means business relationships are easier, with your team, with suppliers, with clients. Obviously, when you take it home to your family, you can just operate more easily in the world without getting so easily triggered so that you get reactive.
And it's getting easier in the world because you're easier on yourself,
Yes,
right?
nice.
Because that's what I'm noticing. I'm able to let a lot more things go that used to piss me off and frustrate me, and I would stew about it for weeks. Now it's just like, I guess it's radical acceptance now, but it's okay. I'm
Like
not
that.
perfect. It's okay. I don't need to be perfect anymore. Um, Learning to let go is another one.
And the term radical acceptance is so powerful because you can accept things, but you still kind of resent it. But radical acceptance is like, no, you make it okay, which
Yeah,
is really powerful.
yeah. And in the end, we still have the decision, but you're creating your own misery to a certain extent, right?
Yeah.
It comes down to like, all right, I'm gonna nerd out here, but like Obi-Wan told Luke. Luke said, you lied to me. You told me that Vader killed my father. And he goes, yeah, but you know what? From a certain point of view, it's still a truth,
Mm.
right? So a truth is always from a certain point of view. That's why a lot of our perceived fact, or a lot of facts that we think are true, are actually perceived, not necessarily true. Look at from the other lens. And this is
Right.
what DBT really helped me, to start seeing. I always had that knack to deal that with other people and their stuff, but to look at me internally and all the walls and the mass I created over my lifetime, that was a huge thing, because it's always a perceived fact, a perceived slight, a perceived whatever. But we got to kind of put our brakes on, either check the facts or let it go.
Yeah, and when you can relax into that, which is kind of what radical acceptance does, you
Hmm.
get to show up as your much more authentic self.
Yeah.
You can be more present, right? And that just makes life a lot easier and for you and around you.
Yeah.
So it's an awesome strategy.
Yeah. And like, that's why when I got into this wise mind and the states of mind, it was very, very powerful. Um, One, the radical acceptance was huge. The perceived facts, not really having, and then just with this discussion with the body awareness, I think it's very important for people to start paying attention to their body, even if you don't have an idea or sense of what it is. But at least if you start becoming aware of it, becomes an early warning. And then just remember, like Shannon said, creative. You have a choice between a creative or reactive response. They're all the same word, but they have same letters but rearranged. So rearrange your response from a reactive to creative is very powerful. And
Mhm.
I think what I would like to do is we're going to end it right here. So your states of mind is your reasonable mind and emotion mind. Overlap them, you got your wise mind. That's your wisdom. From your cool, rational, task focused, reasonable mind, and then your emotion mind, which is hot, mood dependent, and emotion focused. Bring it together to find a middle path. And then what I want to do is we'll come back next week and we'll talk about how those two states of mind are overlap with the doing and being mind, and it becomes more skillful.
Mhm.
So thanks again, Shannon, for having a lot of great insights here, body awareness. And your radical candor book is out due soon.
It's a book by Kim Scott that
Okay.
someone turned me onto, and I am in love with it. Uh, the book No Ego by Cy Wakeman and Radical Candor by Kim Scott are my two favorite management leadership books.
Okay.
And I've read a
Up.
lot, so that's high praise.
All right. And we'll put that in the show notes so you guys can have that reference. So thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Great. Thanks so much, Andre.